Society. We just want to welcome you all. A big, warm welcome for Mike. He is a friend of the Society, and we thank him for joining us tonight. Tonight's going to be a night of just talking to Mike. Q&A, really casual by his request. So please feel free to think of your question, formulate it, be direct in asking it, and he's going to give the best possible answer in the shortest, most concise form. And Ramon will be in the back. He will have this microphone so that when it is time for you to ask your question, please speak clearly into the mic so everyone in the room can hear. Okay? Once the Q&A is over, we invite you all up to the third floor. Mike will be signing, and there'll be bar, cocktails, anything you'd like. All right? So,
anything
Mike?
you like? That's a I don't know about that. Excellent. I just got that. Bear with me if I'm slightly distracted, because I just got the most chilling email you could ever get from your lawyer. It said, relax, I think it was, relax, meditate, I'll call you later. So that's going to be banging around in my head until you guys start asking questions.
Do it live, just get him on the phone.
I never want to talk to him, especially when I've just gotten that message. So, any questions? I mean, I have no agenda, so I'm just here to talk about whatever you guys want to talk about. So, yeah.
Now that you've been, doing, thanks. Now you've been doing what you've been doing for so long, I understand and am currently experiencing that, like, the better you get at a thing, the less you're actually allowed and able to do it, right?
I don't know what that means.
Well, like the business of like getting the things done, like gets in the way of like doing them, right? Like making the work. So my question is like, how often do you actually have to talk to your lawyer? Is that like?
I don't talk to my lawyer unless they make a movie, okay. Because the beauty of my situation with comics is that deal, whatever that deal was set up 25 years ago. So when people ask me, about stuff, I have a pretty good idea of what rights I have and what rights the movie guys have. So any rights the movie guys have, I go, I don't know, talk to whoever's currently has the rights to the movie. So I only deal with the comic stuff, and all my deals are done. The percentage that I get on the book is done. So I have no interaction with the lawyer unless, again, every 10 years they want to make a movie.
Right.
So I live like an infant. My wife, I'm very lucky to have a wife who is a business person. She doesn't technically work on my stuff anymore, because for a while there she was running the website and stuff like that. She doesn't do any of that stuff. But somehow she pays the bills and I just make up my stories and paint or whatever the hell I'm doing, and somehow that translates into things that pay for electricity and mortgage.
Hey Mike, just want to thank you, of course, for, as he said, you've been doing what you've been doing for a long time. I think everybody here really appreciates it. We just love living in the world that you've created.
Oh, thanks.
So I'd like to sort of jump way back, and my question was just about the creation of the character of Hellboy. And I saw that statue recently of like the original sketch you did for Hellboy, where it was really more of like a monstrous demon-looking figure. And I wondered if there was a moment or something that a character that you saw or referenced that really turned him from maybe more of a demonic monster character into what he's got going on, more of like a Sam Spade, the language of the 50s, the tough guy.
Well,
and stuff like that.
I've always been kind of a fantasy guy. The original Hellboy drawing was just a drawing I did for fun. Bear with me, all the people who've heard this story a million times. I was doing a convention, and they had a program book, they said, oh, can you do a drawing of whatever you're working on or something so we can put it in the program book to, announce you're going to be at the show. And I was not, my first 10 years of my career, I did a little bit of a bunch of different stuff. So maybe I was drawing Batman, but I didn't want to draw Batman. So I just made up a drawing of Monster. And at the last minute, when the drawing was finished, there was this kind of open space, this belt buckle kind of thing. And I just wrote in Hellboy because the words fit and I thought it was funny. I didn't give it any thought. And but I remember making up that name, which is weird. To go back and think that was the first time I said it. It was the first time I put those two words together. And I just thought it was hilarious. I didn't give it any thought. I never thought, oh, I'm going to do this for a living. But it was a couple years later when I started seriously thinking about doing a create-your-own book. And I had done a Batman comic where I plotted it myself. And it was a straight-up supernatural story. And I thought, I want to do more shit like that. But I'll create my own character instead of trying to shoehorn other people's characters in. And then it was just a matter of, well, I assume no one will buy it. Well, what if they do? And I'm stuck drawing this thing. If I make up a regular human being as an occult detective, sooner or later I'm going to be bored drawing that guy. Probably within minutes I'll be bored drawing because I have a very short attention span. But I look back at that Hellboy drawing. First off, it was the only time I ever made up a name for a character. Brilliant name. And I said, I did this guy just for fun. Let's see if I could do that for a living. I didn't think it would work, but I thought on the off chance this thing works, I'm stuck drawing something I already started out drawing just for fun. And I wouldn't have any idea how to go about making up a commercial character. So I thought, I kind of burned my bridges with Marvel, but I knew everybody at DC and I could do stuff there. So I thought, well, let me just duck out and do this one thing and make it, for the, however old I was, 25 years ago, the 25 years ago version of me, that was as pure a Mignola thing as I could come up with. Because what was important to me at that time is duck out for 6 months or a year, however long it's going to take, and do this one thing. You're never going to get another shot at it. But at least there'll be something out there that after, the dreadful end of my career where I had to draw whatever I could get my hands on, I'd be able to look back and say, once I had the opportunity to do exactly what I wanted. And I did it, as opposed to saying, a lot of other guys I know, they looked around and said, what do people seem to be buying? I'll do this, I'll do that. People liked the way I did Batman. I briefly thought maybe I should make up some Batman kind of guy. But I figured I won't have fun drawing it. Chances are it'll be the first image comic that nobody buys. So I would have wasted a year doing something I don't want to do. So if nobody's going to buy it, then at least let me just have fun doing it. So, yeah.
Thanks again for coming out. I think it's pretty fair to say that you have a pretty distinct style. I was wondering how long it took you to develop that style and if there was a process to finding it.
Yeah, well, I've been doing this stuff professionally for 35 years. So it took 25 years. It's probably in the last 10 years, maybe even more than that, maybe the last 15 years. I've gotten pretty happy with what I was doing. But it's just, the one good thing about comics, there's a lot of good things about comics, but one thing about drawing comics is it's so goddamn much work. Every day you're sitting there and you're doing these pages. It's not like being an illustrator where you're taking a week to do one drawing. You're doing 5 or 10 drawings and compositions every day. So you mess up a lot and you go, next time I'll change this. And next time isn't 2 weeks from now. Next time is tomorrow. That didn't work. But maybe I'll try this tomorrow. Maybe I'll try this tomorrow. And also, I never did a long run on any kind of a monthly book or anything. I did short projects. So when I finished a project, I would go, that didn't work. Let me do the next one different. So it's just a refining thing. I've always just tried to make my stuff solid. And once you've been colored badly, you start going, okay, I need to simplify my work so it's easier for the colorist to understand what they're looking at. I always think of like somebody putting their hand around another person's shoulders, and all you draw is the fingertips coming over a guy's shoulders. Colorist isn't going to know those are fingertips, you know. But if you make that other figure mostly black, so there's little white shapes around the corner, it's easy to say, oh, those little white shapes, those are fingers. If that makes any sense to people, it was making myself colorist proof. You know, it's but also solid and readable is what I was ultimately. I mean, I didn't know that's what I was looking for, but process of elimination over the years, I realized that's what I was looking for. Yeah.
Hi. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about tone and atmosphere as kind of narrative elements in your comics, because they seem to be really for me at least, for when I was reading it, that was kind of like the main draw. That was really cool. And also how text, how you use text to kind of, or how text relates to those as well.
Well, for tone and atmosphere, I don't use text, so that's pretty good. Actually, one of the first things when I started writing the comic, one of my main goals has always been not to embarrass myself. And as a person who wasn't a writer, the first thing I said is, let's do as little writing as humanly possible. But so I want to do mood, I want to do atmosphere. How do I do it? If I was Ray Bradbury, I could write you 6 paragraphs of what the wind smells like. What I can do is a drawing of leaves blowing, and if I've got the right guy coloring my stuff, I can say give me these autumn kind of colors. So I was thinking in pictures. As far as tone, atmosphere, because I'm a ghost story, horror story guy, one thing I did spend a lot of time thinking about is how do I create mood and atmosphere? It's one thing to draw a spooky picture, but if you want to keep the reader engaged, at least the way I was thinking, I need to slow things down. So instead of one picture of a spooky house, let's do 4 pictures where we zoom in on the spooky house. An extra panel of leaves blowing. It just slows it down. It makes it quiet. Because it's not film. You don't say, oh, we're going to hold this shot for 5 minutes. It's one picture. And somebody can flip to that picture really fast. But if you give them 4 or 5 pictures, they're forced to slow down, hopefully, and look at that. So it was just, if I'm understanding the question, that was my thing of trying to, because I'm a horror story guy, I'm an old-fashioned horror story guy, it isn't blood and guts, it's mood. It was, how do I find a language in comics to do that?
Hey Mike,
Yeah.
Just had a quick question about the first issue of Hellboy and how you went about pitching it to Image, and did you reach out to somebody, or were you kind of?
Well, I never pitched it to Image. It was always
Dark Horse,
it was Dark Horse, yeah. There's a story that went around, I don't know where it started, that I pitched this book to DC and DC turned it down. I didn't pitch it to, well, I guess I did pitch it to Dark Horse, but it took 1 second. Dark Horse, according to Mike Richardson, the publisher at Dark Horse, he had been after me to do something for Dark Horse. I don't remember that. I just remember I was living in San Francisco, Art Adams and I are friends. He was talking about doing a creator-owned book. We'd been talking to Frank Miller, John Byrne was doing creator-owned stuff, everybody was doing stuff at Dark Horse, and we just started talking about why don't we all do our creator-owned books together as a separate imprint at Dark Horse. And we went to Mike Richardson, I believe it was at a party, some kind of San Diego convention party, and we just went up and with Frank, it always helps to have Frank Miller with it. Went up with Frank and said, Mike, Mike, we want our own separate imprint at Dark Horse. We want to bring all our creator-owned books to you, and we want the same deal you're giving Frank. I'm sure I wasn't the guy doing the talking. Probably John Byrne was doing the talking. I don't know. And Mike said, yeah, okay. And Mike said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to do this thing called Hellboy. He goes, okay. I do not believe any other publisher, probably for good reasons, would have ever said to a guy who was not a fan favorite artist for the most part. I mean, I had a couple successes, but I wasn't Frank Miller. I wasn't John Byrne. who would say to a relative unknown guy, you have something with an amazingly stupid name? I'm not even going to ask you what it is. I'm just going to say, yeah, okay. Oh, and we're going to pay you to do it. Oh, and you get to own it. So that's how that worked out. I wish it was a better story. It's just the story about the luckiest guy on earth.
Hi.
Hi.
You've been one of my favorite creators since I was a child, so.
I always love those questions that age me right
Well, I am a comic creator trying to break into the world. I'm building my portfolio, and I have a book that I'm trying to push. And my question for you, since I think you're probably what separates you from other creators, is you've really taken control of your creations in a way that many other creators haven't been able to. Like, your work is solidly your own, and I feel like you've become like a showrunner of the Hellboy franchise. So I'm wondering, what did you do, and how did you get to the point where you were able to protect your work and sort of take ownership of where those characters were licensed and how you were able to?
Well, I mean, the tricky thing is, it's not about taking control, it's letting control go over the years. I mean, I never thought, like I said, I never thought Hellboy would turn into anything. And I never thought it would, once it did, I did more than one story. I thought it would just continue like a guy who does a regular creator-owned comic, where I own the character, and when I want to do a story, I'll do a story, and that'll be it. And then it was little things of, well, what if we tried this spin-off book, which somebody else would draw, or somebody else would write and draw. So it was just, it's been 25 years. It's a little thing of saying, well, let's try this and let's try that, because I've got so many stories, or I've got so many characters, little by little, and it just kind of spread out. And there was no way I could keep my hands on everything. So you have a friend who's a writer who you get along with, and you've been talking about over lunches and stuff like that. And you go, hey, dude, why don't you write this BPRD series? And then we'll just talk about it on the phone, and I'll give you a rough idea where I think the book should ultimately be going. But for the most part, I'll leave you alone to do whatever the hell you want. And it just kind of little by little snowballs like that. When it comes to stuff like film, that's a whole different ball game, because you know damn well no one's ever going to make a movie about something called Hellboy. So you get a call, and thank God, my deal with Dark Horse, they didn't have the film rights. They gave me, I mean, maybe because it was called Hellboy, they said, why bother? Let him have all the rights. Who cares? And then they came to me a year or so later and said, well, we'd like to option Hellboy for a film. And if anybody knows anything about movie options, they don't pay very much, but it's pretty much free money. We're going to give you X amount of money so that somebody could maybe make a movie. For a year, these guys have the right to make a movie if they want to. And you're like, well, shit, there's nobody ever going to make this movie. So that's great. It's free money. I don't have to worry about a movie being made. I just get free money. And I thought, man, if I can just get a couple of years of that before somebody says, dude, come on, nobody's ever going to make this thing, and then it'll be a dead issue, which is fine, because I didn't make up Hellboy to be a multimedia franchise thing. I just wanted to get away with drawing monsters for a living. So nobody was more surprised than I was when somebody said, oh yeah, we're going to make a movie. And you're like, holy shit, you called my bluff. But by that time, I signed an option deal for Hellboy, I guess I've been drawing the comic for a couple years. And once I started drawing that comic, and once I got beyond that first miniseries, I did start having a lot of ideas what I wanted to do with this character. First off, you're like, I'm not going to invest too much because I know damn well it's not going to go over. And then you go, oh shit, I'm getting away with it. Well, if I'm going to do this, then I could do this, then maybe I could do this. So by the time I signed that option deal, I was like, oh, I've actually got a lot of plans for future Hellboy stuff. Starting to know where this character is going and the kind of things I can do. And then you sign that option deal, and while most of me was thinking, well, it's a safe bet. They're never going to make a movie. The other part of me, big part of me, that always anticipates disaster, that part of me said, yeah, but what if? And if they make a movie, it will be the worst thing ever. It will set a new low bar for comic book film things. Howard the Duck, genius compared to this. So you go, oh, fuck. And I was really hoping to keep doing Hellboy, but there could be so much stink on this thing that I'll never be able to do Hellboy again. So on the ride home from Dark Horse, after signing that contract, I made up another character. And it was a supernatural detective kind of a character, and I made him up specifically so everything I wanted to do with Hellboy, I could roll over into that guy if Hellboy tanked. And for years, that character, I called him my lifeboat character. He was it's like a lifeboat on a ship where you go, all my clothes are in there, I got food, I got water, everything's in there. If the ship goes down, it's okay because I've got all my important shit in the little boat. So that's what I did. I have no idea if that answered the question.
Do you have a daily routine and a regular schedule with art, or is it different every day? You go.
It's different every day, and as the years have gone on, and I've tried to semi-retire like 5 times in the last 2 years, and I'm gonna just not do comics, and I'm gonna paint, and then you go, well, now I want to do comics. It flip-flops all over the place. I'm always kind of working because I don't really know what else to do. But there are days where, and it doesn't happen very often, but holy shit, you have to go to a meeting, or you have to do this. I'll do anything to avoid meetings, but you make up shit, and then somebody options it, and then somebody starts talking about making a TV series, and then you go, we need you downtown for a meeting. And you're like, why do you need me? They go, because you made the shit up. You're lucky they want you at the meeting. So okay. So yeah, things are more complicated than they used to be. But I get up in the morning, early, and I go in the studio, and I'm there all day. And I used to, after dinner, go back in the studio. I usually do go back in the studio, but it's not nearly as productive as it was when I was younger. So, but that's where I am all day, and I'm doing something. Sadly, some of that day now is emails, foreign deals, and just shit that usually isn't too time consuming, or interviews or things like that. But it does take up a chunk of your day. What I want to be doing is sitting at the drawing table, because then I can watch TV. I hate writing. I like making shit up, but I hate writing it down because I can't do that with the TV on. If I get the TV on, then I can settle into the drawing table. It'll keep me from wandering around the house. A lot of guys can't work with the TV on. I understand it, but me with my short attention span, as soon as I'd have a hard time drawing something, I'd go to the kitchen, or I'd go outside, or I'd talk to the cat for 45 minutes. But if I've discovered a TV series and there's 6 seasons of it, and I go, holy shit, that's a month of drawing comics, so they can just pick the next episode. So that's my secret for staying in getting things done.
Hey Mike, longtime fan. I have a question in terms of your artistic process, because at what point did you realize that you wanted to ink your own work? Because when you look at some of your earlier stuff, a lot of times it was inked by different people. So what was the point where you're like, okay, I feel confident enough to ink my own work, and I'm going to ink my own work going forward?
It's funny. There's a lot of weird stuff about my career that I hadn't thought about until recently. Well, I started as an inker. I was a terrible inker. I was an inker for a year because I didn't have any confidence in my drawing ability. But it turns out I was so terrible as an inker. My original editor, Al Milgram, when he saw my portfolio, it didn't have any inking samples. It was just pinups. And he said, well, you don't have any paid samples. I go, dude, I'm not here to draw comics. I just want to ink other people so I can use a brush. But I was shitty at it. He encouraged me to be a penciler. I was too chicken shit to do it. After a year of a failed inking career, I ran into Al again, and he said, I noticed your inking career is completely over. Are you ready to try drawing comics now? And I have no skills outside of my rudimentary drawing abilities. So it was like, I don't want to, but I guess I gotta try. So I went from being a shitty inker to a shitty penciler, but because I was already an inker, I mean, the first job I did was a backup feature in Marvel Fanfare. And so it was like, there was no deadline or anything. And I was like, well, yeah, I'll ink it myself. And then I was, and Rocket Raccoon, because it was such a big project, 4-issue miniseries. If I inked it myself, it would take forever. And I don't know whose decision it was. It was probably somebody else's decision to have, somebody else ink it. But that was the norm in those days. It's just, you're working for Marvel Comics, you're going to be a penciler or you're going to be an inker. That's just how the machine operated. And I did a bunch of jobs like where I just did layouts and somebody else finished the stuff. It was always frustrating, but at the same time, I almost always inked my own covers. So I kind of knew what my stuff was supposed to look like. Yeah, I don't remember there was ever a conscious, I've got to ink my own stuff kind of a thing. I think it was mostly when projects became short enough, I could do it myself. If it's going to be a 100-page graphic novel, I'm going to drive myself crazy if I'm penciling and inking the whole thing. But if it's a 10-page story, sure, I'll ink that myself. And then at some point you just go, well, you know what? I ink my stuff better than anybody else does. Plus, Craig Russell told me something once. He said, I love inking you because it goes so damn fast. And I went, he's making a lot of money inking me. And he gets a third of the artwork. Maybe I should ink myself.
Hi, Mike. So, your stories draw elements from history, mythology, literature. Just wondering what your research process is like.
The beauty of this whole thing is that I'm doing stories inspired by stuff that I've been reading since I was in high school. So I've always read a lot. I've always been interested in folklore and mythology and that kind of stuff. And that stuff is copyright free. So I've only, in 25 years of doing Hellboy, I think I've only made up 2 fantasy character names. I viewed all of not literature necessarily, but I viewed all of folklore and mythology as my toy box. These are my characters. So I don't have to make up the names, and I can read these weird old stories with weird descriptions of crazy characters, and then just put my spin on them. And it was what interested me. I had hoped to someday do an adaptation of an old Irish folktale called Tig O'Kane and the Corpse. And then when I did the third Hellboy story, which came out in a weird way, there was I'd done the first miniseries, and then the second one was a short story that I wrote myself, which was a nightmare because it was my first time writing. And the third story, Dark Horse came to me and said, there's a catalog. Before there was Diamond, and there used to be another distributor. And I think it was for their catalog. They want to serialize something in 2-page installments. So can you do a Hellboy story that we can run as 2-page installments? And I remember this Irish folktale that I wanted to adapt. And I thought, gee, if I stick Hellboy into that story, it's very episodic. And I had to pad it out with other bits and pieces from English folklore and other Irish folktales. And it was the most fun I ever had. And that made me realize that these stories, if I had done an adaptation of Tig O'Kane and the Corpse, who the fuck would have read it? But when I realized these things I wanted to do separately, if I bring them in and stick Hellboy into them, I'm getting to do these old stories that I love, and I've created a character that might, function in that world, and actually might be part of this body of work. So another story I did, Hellboy story, The Chained Coffin. That's again an English folktale I wanted to adapt as a straight, adaptation, and it ended up being Hellboy's origin story. So, yeah, I kind of built my world on the back of all these really cool old stories. And I have a massive library of that stuff. And it's very comforting because in my studio I have a lot of bookcases, and my whole folklore library is in my studio. So I've never really suffered too much from writer's block, but it's comforting to look around the room and go, oh yeah, there's a collection of Italian folktales. I've never read any of them, but I've read the table of contents. And you can tell from the table of contents that half of that shit can be turned into Hellboy stories. So it's very comforting to know if I run out of gas, all I gotta do is start picking and choosing what's in my library.
Hey Mike, so as a writer as well, I was wondering, you said you work with the TV on. Is there any music you work to?
I'm not a music guy. I mean, I know some people write with music on, but when I write, I probably could listen to music, I've just never done it. So, I mean, I remember reading an interview with a writer years ago, and he was a prose writer, but he was saying, when I write a battle scene, I put on the soundtrack to this, and I do this, and I do this, and I do this. And I guess I'm afraid when I'm writing that sounds will influence what I'm doing, and I kind of just like it being my head. I've got to do the voices and all that stuff. So I would find anything like that, I think, real distracting. In fact, the best writing I do is in the shower or going for a walk. Because I think, especially with the shower, I think it's like a sensory deprivation thing. I find it very soothing and very comforting. And writing is, I know how drawing works. I've drawn my whole life. And it's a lot of sweating and swearing and trying to get shit to look right. Writing, when it's working, I have no fucking idea how that shit works. Characters show up and they start talking, and this character's talking to that character, and you're going, really? Okay. And that's how I take a long shower, but at some point I have to get out of the shower because I go, okay, that's 45 exchanges of dialogue. I gotta get out and write some of that shit down, because if we keep going, I'm not gonna be able to remember what you guys are talking about. And simply, if I'm stuck on, especially, dialogue I find relatively easy to write, because people talk. You listen to people talk. You go, oh, that's how people talk. Anything I've had to write, like an introduction to something or something like that, that shit is a nightmare. I fucking hate that stuff. And I can sit in the studio and stare at the computer forever, but if I get out of the house and go for a walk, it starts coming together. So, I don't know. That's how it works for me.
You were mentioning books that you have in your studio, and I was just wondering, are there any in your collection that are really, really strange or incredibly rare that you would grab in a rush if you had to? Were there any favorites or strangest ones that you have?
No, I've got some favorites because they're so weird. There's one, Bones and I. I've never read it, but it's got a great front piece. And it's, because a lot of the stuff I've got, you read about the book and you go, that's fantastic. If I actually read the book, it's probably not as good as it sounds. But it's tales told to a guy by a skeleton he found sitting in his office. And the front piece is a guy, it's a Victorian era thing, and it's this guy looking at a skeleton, and the skeleton sitting in a chair like this. I'm thinking, wow, I want that to be the greatest book ever written. There's another one that's a favorite. There's an old fantasy writer. He wrote that famous story, The Girl and the Tiger, or The Lady and the Tiger. Anyway, I can't think of the guy's name, but he was a fantasy writer, Victorian era, I think. Wrote a bunch of these fairy tale-like fantasy stories. He died. Well, I've got a book that is more stories by so-and-so as told to some woman by his spirit. And the cover is this woman sitting at her desk, and this guy's ghost standing over her shoulder, with his hand on her shoulders. And it's a whole book that was published of this guy's stories as narrated to this woman from beyond the grave. That's a favorite.
Hey Mike, today is the 25th anniversary of the passing of Jack Kirby, and I was wondering if there are any particular lessons you take from him or that, carry on with you.
Jack is so huge to me that I want to say everything. It's just that's just. There's a lot of different Kirby directions I can go. I learned a lot from him. I was a huge fan of the material he did, without really thinking about the artwork. It was just so. That was Marvel Comics to me. Thor and Fantastic Four. That was Marvel Comics to me. I didn't really think about his actual drawing, until I did Cosmic Odyssey, which was this big DC thing that had the New Gods in it. And I wasn't a DC guy, so I didn't give a shit about the New Gods. I didn't know anything about the New Gods. But I did spend a year drawing with Kirby stuff on my drawing table. So I was constantly looking at Jack for reference. Not trying to in any way imitate him, but I realized I was trying to draw up to that point in a very bad way. I was trying to draw very correctly and very anatomically correct, and I wanted to be a Dave Stevens kind of an artist, one of those guys, Adam Hughes, But I don't have the chops for that. And my leanings as an artist, I realize, aren't that way. It's more graphic minded. So looking at Jack for that long made me realize, wow, maybe that anatomy doesn't make any fucking sense, but it's got so much power. And I remember thinking, why isn't everybody who's doing superhero comics, why aren't they all looking at him? Other than Walt Simonson, nobody seems to be looking at Kirby. Nobody seems to be understanding the power of that stuff. I saw comics getting more and more quiet, and Jack's stuff had so much power. At the same time, if he wanted to be subtle, he really could be. The guy could do anything. And nobody else, to my knowledge, will ever be able to produce that much work and be able to invent that much stuff. And I'm not talking about like creating characters, because there's always going to be did Stan do it or did Jack do it? A magic thing happened for a few years at Marvel between Ditko and Stan and Jack, and just this amazing shit happened. Everybody had a hand in it. Things bounced back and forth. Stan was giving Jack a one-sentence plot over the phone, and Jack turned it into something. But Jack would come up with that if Stan hadn't suggested it? Who knows? We'll never know. But he visually invented so many things. And I draw 3 issues, and shit all starts looking the same. But this guy's making up Skrulls one day. He's making up Doctor Doom the next day. He's making up, God knows. You read one of those books like The History of Marvel Comics, and you realize there's just this brief period where all this shit got invented. A few things have gotten invented since, but for the most part, after, 68, Marvel is kind of running off of this machine that was created in just those, 5, 6, 7 years. Who else could ever do that? So, I've gotten to create my little thing. I've created 5 characters. Jack would have done that, before breakfast.
Thank you for this talk, Mike. Reading through Hellboy in Hell recently, and just going, I haven't finished it, halfway through, the same. But I find it to be an utterly transformational experience. I love your other work in Hellboy. I love the collaborations that you do. But Hellboy in Hell just sets a real existential setting that's very distinct. And I just think in the medium of comic books or graphic novels or whatever people want to call it, I just think that it's really amongst the best of our time right now. You may agree, you may disagree, or that's up to you. But that, in my humble opinion.
No, I like your opinion.
Do you draw inspiration when you look at other mediums? What do you see out there in the world of movies or music, or something that just really stands out, something that transformed you and also informed you?
I thought we were going to talk about Hellboy in Hell. Basically, everything transforms me. I mean, everything, that's what you do. You suck up everything. That's what was the best thing about like art school for me, is that it exposed me to a lot of different art that if I was just sitting home reading Conan the Barbarian and looking at comics, I wouldn't have been exposed to. So you take it all in. It's hard to say. I mean, I did go through a phase early on when I was trying to figure out what I do, where I was like, well, I want to draw like this guy, except, oh, now I've seen this guy. I want to draw like that guy. So, you know, since those years, it just, everything I like gets thrown into the back. There's this compartment back here, and there's a poor bastard who sits back there trying to stitch all this shit together. And I just see this and I go, ooh, I mean, I'm reading a book. I just want to be reading a book. I'm not looking for anything. I'm reading a book, but as I'm reading the book, there's a part of my brain going, we can use that, we can use this, we can use that. And you go, don't bother me, I'm just reading a book. So I'm going to take those things that you seem to like, and I'm going to chuck them in the back. And that poor bastard back there is sitting there going, what do I do with this? Does it fit onto this? And that's what the creative machine back here is like. It's just a lot of scraps. They get thrown over my shoulder, and somebody's trying to make stories out of them. That's as close as I can come to explaining my thought process back there. But Hellboy in Hell, I do want to talk about because I had a massive breakdown, loss of confidence in drawing comics at one point. You know, doing the story of the island, and for whatever reason, and I've thought about this a lot lately. I think one of the things about doing comics, especially if you're creating your own comics, you have to be committed to what you're doing. Because if you stop and start going, nah, should I do this or should I do this? The whole thing starts, for me at least, the whole thing started to fall apart. The beauty of doing comics, if you can do them fast, is by the time you know it's a bad idea, you're done. So that's good. I think that was one of Jack Kirby's great things. By the time somebody said, Jack, that's the stupidest thing, he's like, hey, I drew 8 issues. You know, I think a lot of his later DC career maybe kind of looks like that. Well, I mean, there was a couple clunkers that he coughed out in a weekend. Anyway, so I had this thing where I literally thought, I can't draw comics anymore. I could still write them, which is weird. I could commit to a story. I think because I could write it really fast, but if I sat down to draw it, I would, part of the problem is, I'm the boss. So if I've made up a story and I start drawing something, I go, this panel isn't working, or you know, I'm having a hard time drawing this guy's foot. Well, maybe I'll do this, and you start changing it, and the whole thing just goes, you know, falls apart. So this story of the island, I started it 3 different times, and I think at one point I drew 12 pages and scrapped them. And that was when I was going, this thing's driving me crazy. I cannot focus. I cannot do this stuff without going, but maybe it should be this. And I think part of it is, it was probably around the time they were making the movie. And it's much easier to do this stuff when you're trying to prove something and you figure nobody's looking, so you'll just do what you're doing. But when people start giving you awards or they're making a movie, you start feeling all these eyes on you, and you start going, well, wait a minute, maybe, not that I was ever really conscious of what the audience wanted, but it was just, well, maybe this will be better, or maybe that will be better. And it just crashed and burned, and I ended up writing it for 6 years. And then I realized that, well, it did take 6 years to realize it's not any fun being a writer. You know, I mean, it's kind of fun, but you can't watch TV when you're doing it. And you keep making up cool monsters and shit, and somebody else is drawing them. So that's part of the decision, was to kill Hellboy and put him in a world where that would be made entirely of the shit I love. Old buildings, half-sunken boats, shit like that. It was just an excuse. I mean, Hellboy already, I think in 15 years of Hellboy, there was like 1 car. You know, and nobody drove it. It was just parked someplace. But for me, and it has something to do with the fact that I did this book, The Amazing Screw on Head, where I made up this weird, it was just a nonsense comic, and it was just made of shit I wanted to draw. And I was like, let's have Hellboy go to that place. And we'll throw out whatever few rules there are about the real world, and I'll just go entirely inside my head. So Hellboy in Hell is really, Hellboy wandering around inside Mike Mignola's brain, which is nice because it's a book nobody else could do. Not that it's better than what somebody else would do, but I'd gotten to a point where I had enough of an audience that I had the freedom to create a book that is as close to taking the inside of my head and putting it on paper. I've never, since the very beginning of Hellboy, there was never anything of, what will the audience like more? It's a red guy with a tail. It's stupid as shit. Somehow they're buying it already. And again, it wasn't an overnight decision, but you just kind of keep getting away with things. I remember when I chucked Hellboy into the bottom of the ocean with mermaids, and I thought, oh, I fucked it up. I had this thing going. I had this thing working. People were buying my comic, and I could do whatever I want. And what did you do? You made a stupid fucking fairy tale. You've ruined it. And I really did. I mean, there have been many of those times where I went, oh, you turn the corner, you turn too big a corner, or you turn the corner too fast, and you hold your breath and you go, they're still buying it. So it's 25 years of going, if I can get away with this, maybe I can do this. And it's not really something you're consciously thinking about, you just kind of get used to getting away with shit. Hellboy, not that it was ever a terribly commercial comic, but after a chunk of years, it was clearly my day job. It was doing fine. And I thought, I don't want everybody to think that I'm just hammering out this thing because it sells. So I want to take a little bit of time and do a book that will let, I'm a former Berkeley art student, right? And it was very important to me that other Berkeley art students wouldn't be saying, this sellout asshole knows he can punch out Hellboy stories all day long, and he's just rubber stamping checks, right? So I thought, I'll make up something that nobody wants. I'm going to make up a book entirely for me. It's just going to be made of stupid shit that I want to draw, and I did it. The Amazing Scroll. I said to Dark Horse, no one's going to buy it. I want you to publish it, so give me the worst deal you've got where I own it. I don't want you to, they pay me something for it, but not very much. Because I didn't want Mike Richardson, the publisher, to be holding it over my head forever going, we published that piece of shit that nobody wants. So I did it for almost nothing, and right away everybody said, hey, that's the best thing you've ever done, and here's an award. Oh, and these guys want to make a TV show. So you go, well, fuck, I got away with that too? So, and if you've ever seen The Amazing Screwing Head, Hellboy in Hell is really, Hellboy wanders into that world. So I am amazingly spoiled. This is 25 years of being left alone with nobody telling you what you can or can't do, and so you just evolve however you're going to evolve. When I started Hellboy, 25 years ago, that was the ultimate version of me doing what I wanted to do, and that's just changed over the years. So, sorry for the long answer.
Hi, you kind of touched upon this earlier, if you don't mind expanding a little bit on it. Hellboy first series was scripted by Byrne, and then you mentioned that doing the second series was a nightmare. So question one is, were you pushed or did you jump in terms of writing, scripting your own stuff? And was there any singular event that no longer made it a nightmare, or is it just something you acclimated to in terms of scripting your own stuff?
Well, yeah, John, I was very fortunate in working with John. John and I had a good working relationship on some other books in DC, and so when it came to doing Hellboy, which I knew I wouldn't be able to write, my first thought was, I will just write up a list of shit I want to draw. I am the laziest fucker on earth. I just want to get paid to draw what I want to draw. So you make up your own comic. But I didn't know how to write it. I didn't think I had any stories, so I said, I'll just give John a list of shit I want to draw, and he'll bang it into a story. And then, over however long it took to actually get around to doing the book, I cobbled that list together myself. So I made up the story. And then, John was going to write it, but I had to write it first so John would know what was going on. And so John, I'm pretty sure, he always knew I should be writing the book. We used to talk all the time. I must have told him everything. He was like, this guy just doesn't have the confidence. Like I didn't have the confidence to be an artist, I didn't have the confidence to be a writer. So John, and I don't know of another writer who had done this, John just acted as my training wheels. He just wrote it, and I edited his script. You know, he would overwrite it, and by the end I was like, can I take out this line, take out that line, take out that line? And what also happened was, nothing against what he did, but I would write a line of dialogue and John would change it, and I'd go, you know, I kind of liked it better the way I had it. And he was intended to change it. I mean, it was always meant to be rewritten by John, but I started it was like I got to practice writing the comic. So at the end of the 4-issue miniseries, he said, you're on your own, son. See, it's not that hard. And it wasn't a falling out or anything. It was just understood that now I've helped you, now you can go do it by yourself. And what I found is it's a shitload harder when you write something down and you go, fuck, that's it? That's really what it's going to be? You don't have somebody, you don't have a safety net. And what was really a nightmare is that first one I wrote myself, a story called The Wolves of St. August, it was also being published in black and white. So I didn't have the crutch of a writer, and I didn't have the crutch of a colorist. So it was my first experience drawing something and sitting back from a finished page and going, oh fuck, that's it. That's what it's going to look like. That's not going to be one of those, colorist will fix it, or, you know, it was just like, no, fuck, that's it. That was very horrifying and daunting. And I had a very patient editor who got me through it. But then the one after that, The Corpse, was that one I just mentioned what I did for that catalog. I had so damn much fun doing that. And again, like Screw on Ahead, I had so much fun doing it. Unlike Screw on Ahead, when I finished it, I looked at it and I went, oh shit, it's not publishable. I had so much fun doing it. It was so different than anything I'd done before. It was the first time I used a lot of humor in Hellboy. And I really thought it was unpublishable. But I hadn't turned this thing in. And I went to lunch with a friend of mine, and he read the whole thing while I sat there like this, and he goes, oh no, you're actually wrong. It's the best thing you've ever done. And it was one of those spit take moments, like, what do you mean? He said, no, this is head and shoulders above anything you've ever done before. And again, right away, I don't think it won an award, but I had artists that I love and respect, you know, calling me up, wanting to buy pages from this thing and stuff. So you're like, this was the light bulb moment. We went, it's the most fun I've ever had, and everybody says it's the best thing I've ever done. And that's the moment where you go, this Hellboy thing might be able to work out. You know, if that's what they want and it's what I wanted to do, that's where I got really lucky.
So I have some viewers on Facebook Live that have a question, and this is from Keith Bow. He asks,
that guy.
if you could have designed any other character, what or who would it have been? Well, who have you created?
Well, if I knew that, I guess I would have created the character. I don't know. I mean, everything I created. There's no. I mean, there are characters I've created that I didn't draw, that I look at and I go, if I hadn't made up Hellboy and I had made that guy up instead, I'd be fine. I did this Russian folklore character, Koski the Deathless, and that's a character that I would have been happy to have, if I'd thought of him 25 years ago, I'd be happy to have just drawn that comic. But yeah, it's too abstract a thing. It's kind of like saying, what are the things you haven't thought of? I don't know, because I haven't thought of them.
I was wondering, so you came up with all these side series like Koski the Deathless and Crimson Lotus. What is the process for picking one of these side characters that you want to make a side series of? And is there any character that you really want to explore?
Well, to be clear, Crimson Lotus is a book I knew nothing about.
Oh.
That's a book. That's John spinning off one of the characters he developed in or introduced in the BPRD series someplace. It might be the only book out there that I can honestly say I had absolutely nothing to do with. But the thing is, I've never looked to expand the Hellboy world. It's just you do a thing, and you do characters, and you go, that's great, now I don't have room for you in the book. And some of the characters go away, and some characters go, no, but remember, I've got these 10 other stories. And you go, fuck, some of those stories are pretty good. Oh, we should do that. Because I started Hellboy as a teen book. It would have had the name of a teen if I could have thought of a team name that wasn't stupid. And by the end of that first miniseries, I was so much more interested in Hellboy than anybody else that all the other characters just got shoved out of the way. And it's probably because we had the movie coming that we thought, well, maybe because of BPRDs and the movie and stuff, there'll be enough BPRD awareness that we could try doing a BPRD series. And it's just snowballs. I made up this silly little pig character, and he's in one story, The Corpse, and I thought he was done. At the end, he shrinks and he runs and to go live in a bush. I never thought he'd come back, but he kind of wormed his way back into. At some point, you're making up a story, and you go, "We need a guy. Oh, this would be a good thing for the pig guy to do." And then the pig guy won't leave. And in fact, there's the giant Hellboy epic that part of which they're basing the new movie on. It turned out, I think, that series is as much about that little pig guy as it is about Hellboy. So some of these characters come and go, and some of these characters kind of insist on sticking around. I don't know. It's one of those weird writer things. Some characters take on a life, and some don't.
You touched upon the fact that you have been able to let some of the control go, be able to have a bunch of projects come out that you yourself didn't draw, other people could do it for you, and you've gotten lucky with a lot of stuff. But knowing that Hellboy originated as you wanting to be able to do your create your own thing for the sake of being able to do it, and you had no expectations, was there ever a point after the myriad of success that you were afraid it got too big for its own good, and you were afraid you might have had to have either end it all or stop it because it grew past what you originated?
It's a good question. There are days where I go, can't we just stop? Can't we just stop? Especially when you get that lawyer email and you go, whatever that's about, can we just let's just shut everything down and go live in a forest? Just run away from whatever this thing is. Yeah, it does become a little ungainly, and that's when you kind of compartmentalize. And my interest has stayed very focused on Hellboy himself. So BPRD more and more, while I was really active in the co-plotting early on, John took that book and Guy Davis took that book and made it an amazing thing. And while John and I would talk, and we kind of agreed on I would say basically, eventually things are going to get here. Actually, in a couple of months, we will get to finally where things have been going. So I'm not going to micromanage the other writer and tell him exactly how to get there, as long as we hit these various places. So it wasn't like I would call up and say, let's plot the next issue. It would be, let's talk about where things are going. Same with working with Chris Roberson on things like Witchfinder. We sketched out that character's career. And then I go, how many books is that? Is it 2 books? Is it 4 books? Is it 10 books? When Scott Alley and I co-wrote this last arc of BPRD, we sat down and I figured out with Scott, mostly I was just doing this thing of, this is what has to happen. At this point, we got to gather all the strings together. And because I have a short attention span, I'm saying, can we do that in 5 issues? He's like, I think it's going to be 30. I think we settle on 15. It's so, because I don't want to tell the writer how to do what they do. Otherwise, if I'm that clear on how it's going to be, I should write it myself. But I think everybody's going to do their best work if you give them some room to do what they do. I don't remember what the question was now.
Were you afraid it got too, like, was the success too much? Or at any point you were afraid
Yeah,
it got too successful?
it gets nerve-wracking, and that's when I'm a solitary guy. And so I just kind of go, I'm just carving out my little thing. At some point, it is weird because it's not yours. You've created something that's so much bigger. When people say, oh, I fell in love with Hellboy because of the movie, which I saw in Iceland, you just go, I guess it's out there. I mean, people know what this thing is. Not everybody, or most people, will never know what I do. But the bigger thing, you just got to make your peace with it and realize that's paying your bills. And that's kind of a cynical statement, which is kind of true. But it also directs a certain amount of attention to the book. When you make certain decisions, I could be a super purist and say you absolutely can't make a movie, it's just got to be the comic. But the revenue that comes from things like movies and other books and stuff, it gives you complete freedom to create something like Hellboy in Hell. Could I do Hellboy in Hell or The Amazing Screw-On Head if I thought this has got to pay my mortgage? So there's trade-offs. I have complete artistic freedom to do stuff, but then I have to live with Hellboy bed sheets. I shit you not. I just had a list from the new studio of merchandise they're looking into, and it's things like bed sheets and curtains. I think you guys have never had a franchise before. I don't think you guys are really clear on what people are going to want. We'll see. I could be wrong.
Hey Mike, thanks again for being here. So you kind of just touched on it, but what's your favorite character that isn't Hellboy?
It's hard. I don't know. They are kind of your children, Like I said, Casca Deathless, that character, I think I could write forever. Love the pig guy. I don't know. Not even Screw-On Head, though. That my favorite book I've done is all the stories that are collected in this book, The Amazing Screw-On Head and Other Curious Objects. It is the book I travel with. It's the book where I go, when I'm crossing the street and that bus is about to hit me, I'd like to think my last thought's going to be, well, at least that book's out there. Because it is the most me. Hellboy in Hell's close, but that Amazing Screw-On Head book is entirely made of stories that I just did because that's some stupid shit I thought was funny. It was, there's no, not that Hellboy was ever commercial, but this thing is the least commercial thing. And it's the purest version of me. So that's my stuff. And as a result, the story I did with my daughter, The Magician and the Snake, has wormed its way into Hellboy because it is so much my favorite story. And it's, in some abstract way, it feels like it's about something. So when I did certain things in the Hellboy and the BPRD world, I go back and I reference that story. Visually, I make clues back to that story.
Hi Mike, nice seeing you again. As a cartoonist and painter myself, I'm really curious. When did painting kick in for you as a medium for self-expression, and how do you balance making images that are meant for contemplation, just single images, versus cartooning, which is making images that are meant to be read? And why do you like drawing monkeys so much? Thank you.
I'll do the monkey bit first. I actually don't give a shit about monkeys, but they always work. Monkeys always work. So I don't draw monkeys for fun. But every once in a while you go, I need something. Well, let's have it be a monkey. It just works. So no, I don't give a shit about monkeys. What was the other part of the question?
Painted.
Oh yeah. I've always, since art school days, I did paintings, and I always thought if I could stand to do more than one in a row, I might actually get better at it. but I would do one, I'd be frustrated, and I'd say, I'll never paint again. I'd give all my paint brushes away, and a year later I'd go, you know, it'd be fun, I'll do a painting. And then the exact same thing would happen. That didn't work, I never want to do it again. So it's always kind of been nagging back there. And as a cartoonist, for me at least, I feel like writing and drawing and telling a story, as an artist, I felt I was shortchanging myself a little bit. It's just, there's something different about saying, I'm putting everything I've got into just making a picture. And so when I decided a few years back that I was going to take a year off to just paint, it was really like, I want to see how good an artist I could be. There's also a thing, because my stuff is so stark and black and white, I mean, you see what the transitions are. It's just black shapes and white shapes. And with a painting, you've got mush. You've got those Frank Frazetta backgrounds where you half see things. And that's why I love working in watercolor, because there's a lot of happy accident stuff. Paper's wet, it's kind of yellow, you introduce a little bit of blue to that, which kind of turns into green. There's a lot of shit that's kind of, you're just doing shit and seeing what happens. And with black and white stuff, I don't have any of that. There's nothing that's accidental about any of that stuff. You draw it, and then you ink it, and it's done. And painting, it's it's scary as shit for me. It takes me weeks to work up the nerve to sit down and do a painting. But when you do it, there's something about it where you just go, there's a lot of pacing involved, but it's just, I'm just gonna be entirely focused, no TV, that's weird, and just be super present in this thing and just try not to fuck up. So it's like playing with it and seeing where it goes. Which, if you're a control freak, yeah, something like this. I mean, all that background, it's just like, what if I do this? What if I do that? I'll add a little bit of this, a little bit of brown next to that wing. It's too much, I'm fucking up. And then you just hope to stop before you ruin it. So that's why I do that. And that's why I don't do it very often, because it's fine if I don't stop, but as soon as I stop, I go, oh dude, am I gonna do that again? That was scary. Except I just did an art trade with an art dealer, and I got a wonderful painting by one of my favorite artists, and I owe this art dealer 2 Hellboy paintings.
What
So
painter was it?
Huh?
What painter was it?
Jeff Jones.
Nice.
All-time favorites. So for me to trade 2 of my paintings for a Jeff Jones painting, who the fuck got the better end of that? But it does mean I've got to go home and do a couple Hellboy paintings. So there you go. Look for them on Facebook.
So, longtime fan. One of the main primary characters of, or at least one of the more important characters of the overall Hellboy story, and I know this also would be our PPOD, I guess, would be Hellboy's adoptive dad, Professor Broom, who's got like this whole, especially in the prequel stories where he's practically like the main character now, which I don't know how involved you are with that, but my question is, how do you regret killing him in the first issue?
No, because, yeah, I mean, it's funny. This is one of those examples of a character who just ends up having more of a life than you thought. I mean, he was just, in that first series, he was just a device. I don't remember why he was there at all. So, yeah, it's, I'm trying to think of it, even if I've had any, I guess I have been involved in something like the BPRD 1940 whatever series that we did. One of the nice things that happened with Hellboy, and it wasn't really on purpose, but the first story takes place in 1994. The main story takes place in 94. But I established that Hellboy showed up on Earth in 1944. So there was always this 50-year, or whatever number, year hole where you could throw other stories. And the more characters you introduce, the more you go, well, what the fuck was that guy doing during that time? Professor Broom was an old man in 94 when I killed him. And then you go, but he was also there in 44 when Hellboy showed up. So what was he doing all those years? And little by little, these characters just go, I know what I was doing, let me tell you. I mean, there's, Abe Sapien, there's like, I think 20 years where we go, we have no idea what Abe Sapien was doing for 20 years. You know, there's, the more we do, the more these gigantic holes appear where you go, oh my God, we have this gigantic vacuum where we don't know what these characters are doing. So even though I've killed off Hellboy and done some other things to that world, there's still so much room to place more stories. I'm writing a bunch of Hellboy stories right now. I'm kind of going back. I don't know if I'm supposed to be talking about this, but I'm kind of going back to what I did Hellboy when I started, where I'm just making up a story and then just kind of going, well, I'm not drawing them. So I'm making up a story and then saying to the artist, when would you like this to take place? So basically, what kind of clothes would you like people to be wearing? So we're just putting whatever dates on them, you know, feel right. And sometimes you go, oh, I want this other character to be in that story, so it needs to take place in between this year and that year. So the bigger this thing gets, the more puzzle pieces you put out there, the bigger the puzzle gets, and the more gaps you see in the puzzle. Does that make any sense? Yeah, all right, cool.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Mike. I'm Annie. It's just a pleasure to be here. My question to you, and I think it would be really important for artists, I'm a writer and artist as well. No one talks, or especially for those who are struggling, what advice to those who are struggling artistically and financially, mostly the financial part of it, because we don't talk about, everyone sees the perfection, but no one sees the oh my gods and the deaths and the explosions and everything that happens in your personal life, and then they just see the issue and what the blood, sweat, and tears that got to just to push that out. What advice would you have for struggling artists or writers to help combat that, especially burnout and hitting walls, or not necessarily writer's block or artist block? This is different. Burnout being that you go full.
Yeah, I mean, life.
Force.
Life is a thing. I mean, it's. I know I can only speak to my experience. Oh, do you want to?
So sorry. Besides burnout and going full throttle and everything, how do you cope with depressions and stuff like that?
Yeah, I can only talk about I have no advice. I can just say what it's been like for me, and I set my expectations when I started amazingly low. I figured I will never be married, I will never own a house, I will, this was 82, so I was thinking I could have a studio apartment in New York, but I would never have more than a studio apartment, because I knew what I wanted to do, and I knew there was no way in hell I was ever going to make money doing it. I figured I would live very, very cheap and do what I do. But it's also, I didn't go into it going, and I'm going to create my own characters. It's like, no, I'm going to be an inker. I'm going to get a regular job. I don't have any skills to get a regular job in the real world. I'm going to get a low job in the comic book industry. So I'll be in the comic book industry, and I'll move to New York, and I'll get to know the people, I'll network with people, and eventually I will be able to find a way, in a backup issue of some comic, I'll do a pinup, I'll do a little story someday. But I didn't allow, I just looked at it in a very practical way. And even when I started drawing comics, I will take whatever jobs I can get. I couldn't be fussy. I was not a very good artist. I was lucky that I got this silly raccoon in space job because they didn't know what else to do with me. But I took jobs that I could get, and I did the best job I could because I was trying to build a career. So I did some jobs I hated doing, but I did the best I could, so eventually I would have some kind of a career. you know, if I had skills to have a regular job outside of comics, I mean, I do think things are very different now. And I see a lot of really wonderful creative stuff being done by people who I know have a day job, or they have, you know, a wife or a husband or a boyfriend or a girlfriend who has a really good job, who supports them, you know. And the more you have that support, the more you can, you know, do your pure creative thing. But if you're looking to make a living doing this kind of thing, then sometimes you gotta eat shit and do terrible jobs. As far as just motivation goes, I just always, the only thing I've ever enjoyed doing is drawing. So I mean, I've always worked 7 days a week, you know. I just never knew what else to do. It's a drive. It's like one of the things when people say to me, I kind of want to be a writer, I kind of want to be an artist, but, you know, how do you get motivated to draw? And I go, if you have to ask how to get motivated to draw, maybe being an artist is not what you do. It's perfectly fine to be an artist as a hobbyist, but if you want to, especially comics, you want to make a living doing comics, you better fucking love drawing comics, because that is a 7-day-a-week job. That is a huge fucking job. That is a lot of goddamn drawings. So you just gotta love doing it, and then you've gotta figure out for yourself what compromises you're willing to make to do it. Yeah, I mean, that's why I always mention, like, the first 10 years of my career, because, you know, people look at my career and go, look at the fucking murder this guy's been getting away with for 25 years. He's been in this stupid damn book that nobody in their right mind would do, and somehow they make movies out of it. You know, it's like, yeah, but I worked my ass off for 10 years to get in a position to create that book, and I got a lot of lucky breaks. So unfortunately, it's one of those things. Everybody's got to find their own way. They got to figure out what they want, and then they got to find a way to get there. And, you know, most people will never get to that spot that I've found myself in, you know, where you get to make up a book where you go, now I'm just going to do a book that's purely what the inside of my head looks like. You know, most people will have to continue making commercial decisions. And maybe the best you do is you have whatever your commercial job is, and every once in a while you put something out there, even if you just put it out on your website, or you self-publish it and sell it at the MoCA convention. You put something out there to save your soul. You put something out there where you go, yes, I do advertising illustrations, or whatever dreadful thing that you might have to do. But on the side, you put out this one little thing where you go, like what I thought was going to be the deal with Hellboy. I go, at least I put something out there that's really mine, so it's in the universe. You know, the saddest thing is, and I've met many people, they just don't have anything like that. They just go, I just draw whatever comics pay the most. And maybe that's a simpler way to live, if all your decisions are based on, this pays more than that. Me, I was very selfish. I wanted to do my thing. I rambled on and I don't know what I'm talking about. So take whatever you can from that.
Because the reason I'm asking is because I just finished doing a Kickstarter last year. I had to deal with him having a heart attack. My mom had a heart attack, she just died, and I'm dealing with depression and anxiety, and I'm doing this comic and I really love it, and I feel like I'm a failure and I'm like hitting a wall, and
I've hit those walls. And there are, I mean, I told you, there was 6 years where I didn't draw comics. You know, that was real. That was, I've got to rethink what I'm doing with my life. And what the real world does, we've all had them, the real world jumps in there and throws you a big pile of shit that you got to deal with. And maybe that means I'm not making my goal this year. I'm not making my goal in 5 years. It doesn't mean that goal goes away. It just means maybe I need to take care of other shit for a while and keep this dream alive that I will get to eventually. So everybody's got to do what they got to do. Yeah.
I have a question that's kind of related to the monkey question. You obviously love certain things so much, and it's so wonderful to see tentacles and crucifixes, frogs, flies,
mention. Well, some things are just like really cool icons from the kind of literature, you know. I read. Crosses, for whatever. I mean, I was raised Catholic, and you just go, there's nothing spookier than that. There's nothing spookier than a half-visible Christ figure in the shadows. That's just scary as shit. Not really my nightmares necessarily, but just they're very evocative. And other things like tentacles are just cool shapes. You know, a lot of this stuff is just shapes I like. So yeah, I have no good answers for that stuff. Nothing is I don't want to say, it's not necessarily personal imagery stuff. It's just, you know, just shapes I like to draw. That's why you don't see me draw cars and airplanes, because I don't like those shapes. They're too rigid or smooth in a way I don't like. I like organic things.
They're just shapes to you. They're not like a frog is not like a.
Well, I mean, sometimes a frog is a frog. That was, you know, I mean, if I go back to where frogs came from, it was reading about things like, oh, it rained frogs. And you go, in a book of weird, fucked up shit that happened someplace. And you go, oh, it rained frogs. And you go, well, that's fucked up. I used that. Something had to come into the room. And you go, huh, frogs. I'll use frogs. And it worked out. I mean, it was in the very first, I guess it was the first issue of Hellboy, you know. And then, yeah, there was something just funny to me about, I'll have frogs fall into a room, and a guy goes, holy shit, frogs! And you go, why is he so upset about frogs? I don't know, it was one of those things that happened, and then it just kind of stuck around. Frogs became a thing. And they're kind of fun to draw. They have awful little fingers and stuff. Yeah.
Two questions. One, do you plan on selling any prints of your paintings anytime soon?
Not anytime soon. It's been discussed, you know. I don't know, maybe. I saw a great thing. Somebody posted this on Facebook, and it was this wonderful graphic, and it was two intersecting circles. If you know the one, people who want prints. What's the other circle?
People who buy prints.
Yeah, people who buy prints, and there's like two people in between. Yeah. So. But maybe, you know, we've talked about it.
My other question is, when you're writing or creating a character, do you imagine a specific voice? Like, do you hear like an actor or somebody in your mind, like Abe and Johan in the movies? Like, is that how you imagine they would sound?
No, not at all. Because I never wrote. I didn't write Johan for a long time, so I never had his voice. But with other, that is one of the tricks, because when I wrote Hellboy, that being the first thing I wrote, the only way I knew how to write Hellboy is, what would I say? So Hellboy has never, I never had to find a voice for Hellboy, because that was my voice, though he has much deeper, better voice than I actually have. And when Hellboy had a female partner, in the first story I wrote, Kate Corrigan, it was simply a matter of, if I said this, what would my wife say? But beyond that, doing other characters, I would kind of think, this is Sean Connery in a particular Sean Connery movie. I would play certain voices, so I just had some kind of reference. And because I do watch a lot of movies, I could kind of, on some level, do that and find some kind of pattern. And especially with the bad guys, there's a lot of things where I'm thinking of a particular Shakespeare film or a Bible epic. You know, there's a lot of my bullshit magic language is because I don't know Latin or Greek. But you watch Jesus of Nazareth, and at one point, Jesus walks in to Rod Steiger. Rod Steiger punches Pilate, and Steiger says. Heche Oma, or whatever the thing is, behold the man. And I went, wow, I don't know that language, but I'll make up some bullshit stuff that sounds like that to me. So that's where my made up language came from. But things like that, like Rod Steiger's delivery of that line is what I hear in my head. You know, various actors' deliveries of various Shakespeare lines and things like that. Those are the rhythms I hear in my head when I'm writing characters. Does that make any sense at all? I've never tried to explain that before.
Yeah.
Yes?
I was wondering, when you worked at Marvel and DC, which book did you really work the best on? Which ones you liked the most and why?
Boy. Well, actually, I do know it. I have an answer for that. When I came off the Hulk, when I was plucked off, when I was still working on the Hulk, my editor at the time, Carl Potts, he wanted to publish adaptations of Fritz Leiber's Fafhrd and the Great Mouse, or a fantasy series. And Jim Shooter said no. And years later, after I'd bounced back and forth between Marvel and DC, for whatever reason, I walked into Carl's office and I didn't have something lined up, and I don't know if I suggested or he suggested it. He says, why don't we do that Fafhrd and the Great Mouse thing? Shooter's long gone. Why don't we do that? and for years I said, if Hellboy didn't pan out, or if some cosmic force said, you are, you know, you must go back and spend the rest of your life drawing one thing that you did before Hellboy, what would it be? And that would be Fafhrd and the Great Mouse. I could wander around in that fantasy kind of world. And DC, I did an okay job on a couple things, but I was so much not a DC guy, none of that stuff really registered. I mean, I did a Batman story that was really the precursor to Hellboy. This the first one I plotted myself, that made me go, hey, if I'm going to make up shit like that, why don't I make up my own guy? That Batman I'm pretty happy with. And only once in all my years of doing stuff for Marvel, Tom DeFalco wrote a backup feature, two-part backup feature in Thor that I drew. And it was the only time that I drew, to me, real Marvel comics. I actually drew Thor and Trolls and stuff like that. And that was, it was only maybe 10 pages total. But that was my one little, I actually drew a Marvel comic.
Hey Mike, thanks for coming out tonight. You mentioned your collaborations with different editors, Al Milgrom, Carl Potts. Who was your favorite editor to work with, the editor that you felt brought out the best in your work?
I mean, it's hard to say, especially since this is being recorded. I rarely remember things like things are being recorded. You know, Scott Alley and I worked together for so long. I don't know that I could have done Hellboy without an editor that would be my sounding board for almost 25 years. And yet, when I think of editors, I think of Al Milgrom, who was the guy who, you know, looked at my work, gave me a shot as an inker, even though he knew I was shitty at it. Actually, he didn't know I was shitty the first time. Then I proved that I was shitty, and he kind of encouraged me to get out of that line of work, and then he did give me my first penciling job. So Al was the beginning, and he was a phenomenal editor. He knew his shit, and he taught me a lot of stuff. He sat with me, put overlays over my work, showed me why certain things work better than other things. Yeah, I learned. I mean, he was my first mentor, I guess. Carl, but there's a Scott Alley story I like to tell. When I did the third Hellboy story, The Corpse, the one I wrote myself, or the second one I wrote myself, the first one that worked, I was between editors. I had editor Barbara Kiesel on the first couple books, then she was leaving, and there was a gap before my new editor was going to take over. So for whatever reason, while I was drawing the story of The Corpse, they said to the kid running the Xerox machine, hey, edit this book. And he was probably the assistant to the assistant of somebody, so he wasn't just a kid running a Xerox machine, but he was not a real full editor. So he was just kind of a placeholder guy. And Barbara said, it's a creator-owned book, so you don't have to, or you really can't say anything to him about what he's done, except fix his spelling, because he can't spell anything. I once, and I used to handwrite my scripts too, horrible. Scott Alley called me up once and said, "What's this word supposed to be?" And I told him, and he looked at it and he goes, "You didn't use any of the letters that are actually." So, but you know, Scott being told just to fix my spelling. At the end of that story, there's a bit where Hellboy's got this corpse and he's going to chuck it in a hole in the ground, and the hole just was a black rectangle. And Scott called me up and said, "It doesn't look like a hole." And I looked at it, and he was right. It needed to have a shadow in there so you saw that it had some depth. And I don't remember this, but the way Scott tells it, I apparently called up Mike Richardson, the publisher, and said, "I want this kid for my full-time editor. Because what I don't want is an editor that's just going to go, 'It's great, send it into production.' I want a guy who's going to look at it and see if shit works or doesn't work. My goal is to do the best possible book and not embarrass myself. And I don't want a guy just going, well, he's a 12-year, 15-year professional. He must know what he's doing. Just open the envelope and send it on to wherever it has to go. I want somebody who's going to look at my stuff and say this works or this doesn't work. Because one of the problems in doing comics is that you know the story, but the reader doesn't. And so it's very easy for you to go, I did this thing, it's obvious. And people go, you actually didn't make it that obvious. Or you didn't make it clear. Or this character doesn't sound like that character. And you know, whatever. So I've leaned very heavily on my editor and you know, for a very long time.
Hey Mike, I've always been curious to get your experience, hear about your experience with the Disney film Atlantis. I remember getting a tour of like the Disney studios. It was the early part of the millennium for people who don't know. And I saw that they had patterned the whole art department, the whole look of that animated film after your style. And I was just so amazed by that. I've never seen that done before. And being a comic guy, I was like, wait, I know that guy. And so like, what was your experience with that?
Well, I mean, I've had I still think I've got like two of the weirdest moments of my life. One of them is going to Disney. Well, I got the call from Disney from Don Hahn, the producer. It was a message on my machine one day saying, "This is Don Hahn from Disney. We're doing a film and we'd like to do it in your style. Would you be interested in working on it?" And you go, what the fuck is that? I guess I have to return that call because how does anybody even at Disney know who I am? And then going up there and walking down the hallway, and at the same time they were working on Tarzan. So the walls are lined with the most gorgeous pencil drawings of, like Tarzan swimming underwater under elephants and beautiful trees and stuff. In the middle of all this beautiful shit, there's enlargements of comic book pages of mine with overlays, with diagrams, explaining in terms I didn't understand how to do what I do or what I do. It was so fucking weird. So it was a fun gig for me because I thought I was scamming the operation. They're paying it by the hour, whereas the comics get paid by the page. I remember going in, showing up at 10 o'clock in the morning, and they said, well, there's a meeting at 2 o'clock. Is that okay with you? And I'm like, I got nothing to do till then. I'm just taking your money. Does this phone work? I'm gonna sit in my office and make phone calls until you tell me there's a meeting. Because I wasn't even doing much drawing. I was there mostly like a consultant. So I thought I was scamming the shit out of them. And I was the only guy who talked. Because for whatever reason, people were just very quiet. I don't know if they're afraid for their jobs or whatever. It's just the atmosphere of the place. But you'd come back from watching a screening or something, and the producer would say, does anybody have any notes? Well, or but you can submit your notes in writing. And I'm like, well, fuck that. I'll do anything not to write shit. So I would just start talking. What about this? What about that? Because I would only go up there for a day or two at a time. And then every time I left, I assumed I'd never go back. So I could say whatever I wanted because this wasn't my job. I had Hellboy waiting for me at home. So I would just blah, 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 what about this, what about that? And people look at me like, what the fuck's that guy doing? It was really fun, and again, I thought I was scamming them because I wasn't even drawing mostly. I mean, I did some drawings. I did them really fast. You learn in animation. If you're a comics guy, you do stuff really fast, and then you go, oh, other guys are spending a month on a drawing like that. So you kind of fudge it when you turn in the drawing and say, hey, it's 3 days. What was I going to say? Shit, I lost my train of thought. So I think I'm scamming these guys. And the story was pretty nebulous. It was weird. I mean, my way of doing this stuff would be make up a story and then draw the pictures. And they're kind of like, well, we're kind of drawing the pictures, and we're kind of making up the story, and we're kind of making up characters, and then we'll see what the characters want to do. And you're like, dude, make up the story, and then make the characters do what you want them to do. Guys are sitting in their cubicles drawing mushroom people. You know, the first time I walked in there, it was like a very art. I mean, I don't know how many art students are here. It was like an art school critique. There's the producer, and everybody's come in from their cubicles, and they put all their artwork on the walls, and the producer's walking around going, this is great, that's great, what's this? Mushroom people, that's cool, this is great, this is great. And he says, so we'll meet again in 2 weeks. And I went, Don, there's not going to be mushroom people. He said, no, there's never going to be mushroom people. Send the guy back to his office to draw more mushroom people for 2 fucking weeks. Where's the deadline for this thing? So that was wild. I mean, it was just, it's the way they do stuff. But as a comics guy, you're used to solving problems pretty fast. And again, I think I'm scamming the operation, and then we're walking down the hallway one day, and there was a lot of reference for like Angkor Wat, you know, Indian ruins with big tree roots growing all over everything. There was a lot of that stuff around. And I was walking by one of these pictures, and I said, well, here's an idea. What if there's like statues and stuff that are like cool, like in these photos, that are like with tree roots growing all over them and stuff. But then when we get towards the climax of the film, these like magic crystal things that people have, they're this power source, and these things we've been stumbling over through most of the movie turn out to be their vehicles. Well, I made up the last 20% of the movie in like a minute. So you go, well, they got their money's worth now. And even, I know a lot of the city of Atlantis is based on my drawings, but I remember the morning, because I've gone back, and they said, well, what do you want to work on? What do you want to focus on? And I said, well, I'll do Atlantis. Movie's called Atlantis, maybe that would be a fun thing to do. So, but I remember that morning, being in the shower going, Atlantis, it could be this, and get out of the shower, and doing half a dozen drawings. No big paintings, nothing really elaborate, but enough working drawings that from these drawings you could basically assemble Atlantis. Now, so that was a morning, or maybe a day. I probably did a couple extra days, probably did some doorknobs and things. But it was basically, and again, I've got my day job, I've got Hellboy. So it's like, well, this was fun, but I want to really get back to drawing comics, so here you go, that's all you should need for Atlantis. But I go to a meeting up at Disney, and a woman brings in a diagram, and she wants to spend 2 weeks on it. It's beautifully painted. This whole big diagram on how plumbing works in the city of Atlantis for a movie that never did and never was going to feature plumbing. And I thought, oh, this is the difference between somebody who's just kind of doing this as a hobby and somebody whose day job is sitting in a cubicle and just producing invisible work for films. And that's what the movie business is full of, is guys who will never see their work, and they're working out gigantic scenes that never get filmed, or working on films that never get made. But I really thought, wow, you're really getting away with something, spending 2 weeks on plumbing. Who thought that? Why didn't somebody say, no, we need this other thing, But no, it's like, no, we've got 1 million people, and we've got all the time in the world, just sure, mushroom people, plumbing, do whatever. So that's what Atlantis was like.
So speaking more about animation, my first exposure to Basic Strong Head was the pilot of the show on Sci-Fi, so I was very eager to hear your thoughts on how you thought that turned out, to see your work.
I've never seen it.
Really?
I can't watch it. I can't watch it because the best thing about that show is it made me realize when people said, "Oh, I love the Amazing Grunthead," I realized they were talking about the pilot. They weren't talking about the comic. They'd never seen the comic. So that made me do that collection, The Amazing Screwhead and Other Curious Objects, because Screwhead was just this one issue floppy comic out there, and I realized I need to put that in a book, so I can give that book to people, or hopefully get people to buy that book, so they can see that piece of work in print. Now the trouble I had with there's a lot of troubles I had with the show. It was a nonsense comic. And because Lincoln's in it, they got it all fixated on it's got to take place in this time period, and they wanted to make it a series, so there had to be relationships between all the other characters and stuff, and I just made up a piece of nonsense. So I understand the changes they made. It was just like, well, it's not my thing anymore. If you're going to try to take this thing that the beauty of, to me, was it doesn't make a shitload of sense, and you're going to make it make sense, well, then you killed it. I mean, it's cool. I hope it works for you guys. Good luck. They sent me a script. I said, here's what I like, here's what I don't like. They said, thank you very much. And then they did whatever they're going to do because they called my bluff. I let somebody on. I let them auction it, and then they said, hey, we're going to make it. You go, well, there you go. You rolled the dice, and you lost again. Lost, but. And because they wanted it to look like my work, which a lot of people I know and respect love that show. But I look at it and I just go, oh, my shit's not supposed to look like that. Yeah. So I can't be objective about it. If it was live action or it was a completely different style, maybe I could see it. I did go to the recording session. That was cool to watch Paul Giamatti and David Hyde Pierce chew over some of my dialogue. In fact, I was very proud of the fact David Hyde Pierce, who came in as the most pro guy, he came in and was like basically, you've got this much time with me, I'll do 2 takes, nothing more than that. And he was just like, let's get this thing rolling, no dicking around, let's go. And there was one line, and it was a line from the comic. He couldn't get it through without laughing. And I'm like, that's my line. And I remember when he and Giamatti were both in the booth together, and the first time he got through it, Paul started laughing. So that was great. That's about all I remember.
What line was it?
It's not a turn up, or it's not a jewel, it's just a dirty piece of crap. Something like that. That's one of my immortal genius writers.
So I got almost 3 questions for you here. First, I loved Champion of the Worms, the Zombie World.
Oh, yeah.
Were you not a fan of that?
No, it's the only time I've ever really done a book Marvel style, where 90% of the work on that book was done by the artist.
I really dug that. Now, would that be something you'd ever be interested in doing, like playing around with those characters again, specifically?
I gave that book to Dark Horse. Right. I basically, as I recall, Scott Alley, who's very young and well-meaning, called me up one day and said, I think because the Island of Dr. Moreau movie was coming out, and he had this, like, we're going to do all these great adaptations of H.G. Wells novels. And I said, nobody fucking wants that. It's too dry, it's too lyric, what you need is Zombie World. And it started as a throwaway gag, and it was one of those deals where he probably called me a week later and said, that Zombie World, is that a thing? And you're like, no, it's just a stupid thing, it's just a stupid shit you say. And it turned into what it was, and I just did it as a goof, and it's not owned by me, it's owned by Dark Horse, and they, so, yeah, no,
Second question would be, if you could play with any property, literature, film, anything Star Wars, The Creature from Black Lagoon, if you could do your own adaptation, what would it be?
The only thing I've ever really thought of adapting is Pinocchio, because it's one of the 2 books that made me who I am, and it's so fucked up. It's so weird. There's so much crazy shit in that book. Has anybody read it? Yeah, my brother wrote a sequel to it. It was very hard for him to sell it because nobody's actually read the book. He wrote a really good sequel. It's available as an ebook with my cover. My favorite bit in Pinocchio is, Pinocchio fucks up endlessly in all these weird ways. The whole point of Pinocchio is if you're bad, you will kill your parents. Your parents will die if you're bad. It's pretty blunt on the subject. At one point, well, there's the cute fox and the cat characters. Well, after Pinocchio kills the cricket, the ghost of the cricket does try to tell Pinocchio, get your head out of your ass and act right. Pinocchio disregards the ghost cricket, and the last thing the ghost cricket says to Pinocchio as he wanders off is, "Good luck, Pinocchio, beware the assassins." And the cat and the fox put on hoods, chase Pinocchio through the woods with knives, and try to dig money out from under Pinocchio's tongue. When that doesn't work, they hang him. The blue fairy looks out a window and goes, "I feel kind of bad for the poor wooden boy who's hanging." She sends a hearse to pick him up. They bring him back. They kind of nurse him back to health in this really fucked up way. And then he goes off. I would just like to tell that part. Doesn't have any bearing on what I'm about to say. Later, he's fucked up again about something. He's decided he's going to be good, and he's going to rush back to the blue fairy's house for whatever reason. And he's running through the woods, and he stumbles over something. And he looks down at what he stumbled over, and it's a tombstone that essentially says, probably sounds better in Italian, "Here lies the blue fairy. She died because Pinocchio was bad." And Pinocchio was on his knees, crying his eyes out. And I'm like, yeah, it's wooden puppets as opera. And there's so much fucked up weird shit. The blue fairy is dead, and then later she's a goat, and then she's some other thing, and at the end she's sick, so he has to sell baskets to buy her medicine. It just rambles like crazy. It might be kind of the way Hellboy was, done. He's going someplace, and he runs into, I think it's blocking the road. There's a giant snake with its tail on fire. And Pinocchio trips over it or falls headfirst in the mud, and the snake, which I don't know why it was on fire, the snake laughs so hard that its guts burst. That's a chapter, Yeah, it's a terrific book. I assume some of the more fucked up shit, if Del Toro actually does make his Pinocchio movie, some of that fucked up shit will be in there.
And final question for you from me is pancakes. One of my favorite little short stories there with Hellboy, young Hellboy. Do you ever want to do more of those kind of just one shot kind of little quick Hellboy
the pancake story is what happens when you're a wise ass. Because I got a call from an editor one day saying, we're doing an issue Dark Horse Presents about the characters when they're young. Do you want to do a story about young Hellboy? And what I intended was no, because I didn't want to do it. What I said, because I'm a smart ass, is I'll do a 2-page story where he eats pancakes. And they went, okay. And you're like, oh fuck. And it was based on my daughter, who at the time was 2 or something, and if you put food in front of her that wasn't just hot noodles with butter, she went rigid like you put a snake on her plate. And it was trying to get her to eat pancakes. And so that's 1 page of the story, and then you go, oh, I said it was a 2-page story, and I've only got 1 page. So then you cut to hell, and everybody going, he ate pancakes. That means nothing. It was just one of those stupid things. So yeah, if something like that happens again, maybe it'll happen. But right now, no. What are we on?
It's 8:30 now. You want to keep going for a minute?
Yeah, I mean, whatever, until the boss back there tells me to stop. Yeah. We should probably, let's do a couple more. Yeah.
I have a question about the thing the project you weren't sure if you could talk about. It's not specific though. It's when you have that many people working on, that many sort of period specific chunks of the stories. Is there someone who's policing continuity, or does that live in your head?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what lives in my head is the mythology and a general sense of where books are going. It was a very good relationship when Arcudi was doing BPRD, because basically I was like Zeus on a mountaintop throwing big thunderbolts, then this giant thing happens, and then that giant thing happens, and then this giant thing happens, and John's like, well, I'll deal with what that does to the actual human beings. So John, took care of the people stuff, and I was more like, but this is what's happening on a cosmic scale. And so, you know, the backstory and the mythology that's evolved over the years, only, you know, not all of it is in the comic, but I know how this thing connects to that thing. And when this thing shows up, I know why it relates to this other thing. I'm never going to show you or never bog you down by explaining it all, but I know on some fantasy fairy tale logic kind of way why it all works. It's much more religion than it is science fiction. You know, I like miracles. I like weird religious-y kind of things, and and I'm afraid of things becoming science fiction. And as soon as you start explaining how that shit works, it starts becoming science fiction. Some of this stuff, you just trust your gut. Del Toro used to call it fairy tale logic. You read enough of this shit, you go, well, it's because the snake with the burning tail shows up. And you go, well, yeah, of course it is. That just feels like the thing that needs to happen. So that's what I'm the keeper of.
You've talked a lot about how much you don't like writing, your short attention span, but one of the book I came across, and I couldn't put it down until I finished it, you know, was Baltimore, the Steadfast Tin Soldier. So how did that really come into being, given all of your hesitance in writing? Is there any possibility of something else like that coming up again?
Well, it depends. If something like this happens again, I mean, I was watching a very boring movie in a theater, and it had terrific settings. It was a boring-ass movie. It seemed to go on for 1,000 years. We eventually walked out. But it was so boring that I went, I'd like to do something that looks like this movie. And so I made up this graphic novel while I was watching the movie. I've always loved vampires. I wanted to do a real old-school vampire kind of thing. I remember sitting on the subway one day and going, I got a World War I guy with one leg, and my all-time favorite fairy tale is Hans Christian Andersen's The Steadfast Tin Soldier. Soldier with one leg. And it was the weirdest thing. It's like, I took that fairy tale. I'd already plotted out mostly the Baltimore novel, or graphic novel it was going to be. And I took the fairy tale, and it's like that, whatever that game is where a little ball rattles down through something. I dropped in the fairy tale to see what would happen, and it made everything work. I remember, it was so weird. It was like one of those, literally I was sitting on the subway, went, what about, bing, and it all worked. But I also realized, oh, it would take a year or two to draw this graphic novel, and I didn't have the patience to do it. So I told people about it, and everybody would say, when are you going to draw that? And I'm like, I don't know, probably never. Maybe if Hellboy stops selling, you know, if they refuse to publish Hellboy, at least I'd have this thing to do. And eventually Chris Golden, who I told the story to, I guess I went to him one day and said, or maybe he suggested, it's like, well, here, I'll give you all the notes I've written for the graphic novel. And he did that. So yeah, there's 3 novels out there that I theoretically co-wrote, and they're all that. They're all things that were going to be a comic, and at some point I was never going to get around to it. The other one is Joe Golem, the cult detective. That's the character I made up when I thought the Hellboy movie might derail Hellboy. So I made up this Joe Golem character. And after years of Hellboy surviving the various incarnations, I went, I guess maybe I can do something with that guy.
One more?
Yeah.
Last one?
Somebody we haven't heard.
Someone we haven't heard from?
Yes. Yeah, in the back. Who was first?
Hey, so you are always mentioning how you draw fast. How do you differentiate between drawing fast and drawing too fast?
Well, I don't know that I said anything about drawing fast. I don't draw particularly fast. Part of that is because I'm watching TV. I draw, well, you know, I can draw fast, but then I tend to erase it a lot and draw it over again and over again and over again. What was the question about drawing fast?
Just like, I guess like how do you pace yourself?
Oh,
What's your pace?
I don't, you know, the only thing I know about drawing is I just do it until it looks right. And sometimes that happens instantly, and sometimes it takes a month. You know, it's, I always think of things like abstract stuff, which I always think is going to be easy. It's like, oh, this scene will be easy because it's all clouds. Clouds are abstract shapes. Batman's cape, to me, is an abstract shape, which means either I do this and it looks right, or I spend a month doing that until it looks right. Clouds are the same thing. It's I do this thing where I almost have to kind of unfocus and just I call it like throwing shapes. It's like I'm just gonna not pay attention and I'm gonna draw a cloud. I don't close my eyes, but I let my hand do it. And if it doesn't work, I erase it and I do it again. Because there's no part of me that can go, oh no, a cloud logically has to be this. I know there are guys who do draw like that. I know there are tons of guys when they do comics, they go, well, a cape is 5.5 feet long and it's made of cloth and it would do this. But to me, because I grew up looking at guys like Frank Frazetta paintings where everything is just turns into some cool shape. Everything has to be a cool shape. I'm a shape guy. And I don't necessarily know how to manufacture those shapes. I just recognize them when I see them. So there's probably some really complicated covers out there with a lot of cool rocks and whatever, machines and whatever, and there's 2 or 3 clouds in the background that ended up being the parts that took 90% of the time. So, does that answer in any way? Yeah, it's just, I do what I do. I do the best I can.
Thank you.
Thank you.